All right, and welcome to Marlins After Dark. Because, of course, no team keeps you up late at night like the Miami Marlins. I'm your host, Sean Millerick, joined tonight by Ely Sussman of Fish Stripes, and we're going to dive into this spring training record that we've got going so far and just what's going on with the Marlins this spring. And, of course, we'll wrap it off with the next name to be revealed on the Marlins After Dark Marlins Top 30 Countdown. Eli, how you doing, and how's spring training treating you?
We're entering this really nice, I guess you could call it the pit stop right in the middle of spring training. That I guess you could take some time to reflect on it, but I've probably been overthinking what we've been seeing in spring training one way or the other. At the end of the day, the most important thing is getting through it healthy with everybody involved. And I guess from that standpoint, it's been a big win for the Marlins. That's been their biggest win. It's just keeping everybody upright heading into the season now, just barely 3 weeks away. Very busy time for us at Fish Stripes, both preparing for the Marlins season and having it completely intersect with the World Baseball Classic and so many of those games being played in Miami as well. And I love it because this is the first normal, it's not even you could say the first normal spring we've had in baseball in several years. And it's even not totally normal because of this. It's even better than a normal spring because of this additional tournament that's lumped right in the middle of it. I'm thrilled to talk to you, and I can't wait to get down there to Miami myself in just the next couple of days.
I'll be heading down as well. So yeah, hope to maybe we'll bump into each other or catch the Marlins in action. Maybe we'll see an elusive win. Do think it's definitely another interesting spring training, like you said. I thought you were going to mention the rule changes on top of it too, but it's just it's been quite the stretch in a row. I remember thinking a couple of weeks ago, you heard some players talking about, oh, it'd be great to have a normal spring training, and thinking, is it? Is it a normal one? But yeah, definitely a lot going on. I believe the Dominican Republic team is a pretty good starting pitcher that we should all be excited about following. But about the Marlins this spring, so yeah, I had a graphic all queued to go. Thank God for Washington, expecting that the Marlins would build on their success from last season. Of course, the only reason that we probably got over 60 wins was the existence of the Washington Nationals, but Washington was able to win today, bumping the Marlins down to 1-9-1 on the spring. How much should we care about the record at this point?
Well, you should not care about the record whatsoever because it's all very, not only these games like totally inconsequential and nobody's making maneuvers to win the games, but also it's just, those are arbitrary cutoffs, right? It's just 9 innings of spring ball at a time, and it just ends whenever it ends. And then it restarts just based on who's available that day, who is scheduled to go, who is getting their work in on a particular day. The record itself is utterly meaningless any way you chop it up. What I am looking at a little bit is the run differential, the runs they're scoring and the runs they're allowing, and how that compares to the rest of the league. I've been considering doing an article on this for a while, and in the back of my mind, I've just been quietly hoping that they turn it around a little bit. They have at least one good day, so that it's not even worth necessary. But I think we've reached a point where it is really jarring to see that through 11 games, they've scored 31 runs. They're averaging less than 3 runs a game. Yes. No other team in the Grapefruit League is averaging less than 4 runs a game. A huge gap in that respect. And then on the pitching side, pitching and defense, they've been one of the worst in the Grapefruit League as well. I think they've led the 3rd most runs, 73 in 11 games. So 6.5 runs a game. They're being outscored. Their opponents are doubling up on them and then some through this point in the spring. And it's been a variety of opponents. I mean, it's been the Mets and the Cardinals, but it's also been the Nationals several times. It's been the Astros, and it's been the Red Sox a couple times. That not all these teams are. When you look at what the Marlins are doing and how the fact that, of course, most of the plate appearances, most of the innings pitched are coming from players that aren't going to be Major League opening day guys anyway. The same is true for almost all the teams that they're playing as well. So when you see that, we've reached, the sample is still less than 100 innings, but the disparity between them and even the next worst team by run differential, minus 42, nobody else in the Grapefruit League is worse than minus 23. So just to see that
I've been at it before. Negative 42 differential.
they're not only performing badly, but the gap between them and everybody else is that big, where they're right near the bottom in slugging percentage, right near the bottom in caught steal in defensively, preventing the running game. Today, they just caught their first runner stealing of the entire spring. In so many different categories, they're allowing just as many home runs as any other team in baseball. That's one thing that really jumps out to me, that you would not imagine a scenario where the Marlins are allowing as many home runs, especially playing most of their games at Roger Dean Chevrolet Stadium, which is notorious for keeping balls in. That's probably the one number that is most eyebrow raising to me, is the fact that their pitching staff is not even putting balls in play. They're like giving up almost 2 home runs per game through this point in the spring. So they're performing really, really badly. It's not the most important thing. It is a thing that I don't think you can blame people for being a tiny bit anxious about seeing this happening for a team that perennially performs better in the spring than the regular season. And now that is completely flipped.
That is definitely true. And you've seen the same things I have. Lots of people freaking out. Marlins Twitter is ablaze as the losses pile up. But yeah, it is just spring. I have been concerned. You'll read these box scores, you'll see the numbers, and you do the reflex is to comfort yourself, thinking that, oh, I guess they just ran into Arenado at a bad day, or they sort of run up to Pete Alonso, or I guess Rafael Devers had a good day. And then you look, and it's, as you said, it's their non-roster invitee hitters that are teeing off and hitting these home runs. So that's a little concerning when you look at who's doing some of the damage. But ultimately, spring record, what does it matter? I believe I was going through all their previous Grapefruit League seasons. The best winning percentage the Marlins ever had in spring training was 2021, and that season didn't really work out for the Marlins. Losing record in 2003. That season went a little better, for Marlins history. They are at least still, so at this point, the good news is that we could probably avoid the worst total, hopefully, in team history, because thanks to the 95 strike, they did only win 3 games in spring training that year. So I'm confident we could win 4. But as far as getting a winning record, don't know about that. Personally, I'm kind of rooting for a palindrome. 1-9-1. I just want to keep that going. Mm-hmm. I think they've got 18 games left, so let's go 9-9. And we'll get that winning record and keep that 10-9-10 record. That'd be something. Do you get any kind of sense about the extent to just the team start to care about this? Like, we shouldn't, but with things you've heard, and Fish Stripes obviously has boots on the ground talking to players. Like, is there a point where this starts to get into the players' heads, or are they all just 110% either bigger things to the WBC on their mind, or just working on what they're doing that day? At some point, do the players start to kind of care about the fact that they're losing day after day in games that don't count and are all about getting ready for the season?
Yeah, it's never going to be about the wins and losses, but in terms of the fact that the runs allowed and the runs scored, and I don't even think that's going to get into the players' head. The players are just going to remember individual plays. Like, if there have been a couple instances where miscommunication has led to some pretty embarrassing defensive moments. So, I mean, that's one thing, especially if one of the players involved is playing an unfamiliar position, which so many of the Marlins players are this spring. If they feel that if a player who makes a mistake in that situation is doing it while playing a position they're not familiar with, because the team is putting them in that position, like, maybe that's something that could build up a little bit. And there's just so many examples, because we think of Jazz and we think of Segura, and we think of Joey Wendell as well. But even further down, somebody like Jordan Groshans, who's playing heavily, his primary position this spring has been first base. And that's
I did not see that coming.
Yeah, for a player, aside from the baseball perspective, for somebody that at his stage of his career, like, he's still he hasn't established himself. Like, it's incredibly important for him to get to the big leagues and succeed in the big leagues. And right after he gets his first cup of coffee, they now have him focusing pretty heavily on this position that I really don't see him playing long term, especially in an everyday role. That's the type of player where and we'll see what they do at third base over these coming days when Gene Segura is gone, who moves over there, because they don't really have a whole lot of natural third basemen in their entire camp remaining at this point. So that's kind of the one thing that I look at is you have a defense performing really poorly, not surprisingly, because you have a lot of guys playing unfamiliar positions. And if they begin to doubt whether they can play those defensive positions and whether the mistakes they make or situations they carried over to the offensive side, and all of a sudden they're not hitting the way they're supposed to, that's something where you look at a few individual cases where this could be detrimental to them if this continues. That's really the big if here. If they continue to be not just like a bad team, but by far the worst team. I just want to underline like how in this sample, how just there's a 50, what was the term from Moneyball? 50 feet of crap between them and everybody else. That's where they're at so far. And that's kind of why it has stuck out to me and other people. So if that continues, then all of a sudden that's the type of spring where maybe it changes. It does change. It does roll over to the regular season if it is that extreme in awfulness all the way through.
No, absolutely. And I think you've touched on a couple of them. It's like, what are some of the things that you are watching for this spring? I've asked that to every guest who's been on. It's like, what, like the spring numbers that matter the most to you going forward. So definitely, I think we're in agreement. Seeing some kind of defensive improvement, maybe not being the bottom in run differential would be things we'd like to see happen here. But is there anything we haven't touched on that you're going to be watching for these next few weeks?
I mean, the main thing I watch for is things that can stabilize over the quickest sample, and that's going to be pitch data, individual pitch data. Thankfully, the majority of these games we have StatCast data for it. That's the most important thing, because even within a single outing, you can get a pretty good feel of what this pitcher's stuff is at this point and how it compares to their historical norms, not just the velocity they're throwing with and the spin rate, but also what pitches they're using and in what situations. That's the most important thing, especially for this Marlins team, because they're going to need to be one of the better starting and reliever, one of the better pitching staffs overall in order to have a chance at being even on the fringes of the playoff contention. So that's to me, that's one thing we can really learn during spring training is what type of stuff these guys are using, how they're using it, how it compares to what we were expecting to see from them. So you look at guys like Trevor Rogers, who coming into camp, he was very hopeful about bouncing back. And one of the ingredients in that was incorporating more of this sinker two-seamer that he barely used at all the last couple of years. And to be able to see that immediately in his first outing, that he was using a couple of them within the first couple of innings, that in itself was a big difference compared to last year. And for him to be able to throw that with a similar velocity to his four-seamer while getting the different movements the opposite direction, like that's notable to me. Just being one example, like with Sandy, his velocity is down a couple ticks compared to where it was during most of last regular season.
Right.
But with him, that doesn't really concern me because I feel like he is knowingly pacing himself, understanding that he has this WBC in the middle of this, that's where he's going to be wanting to throw at his full intensity.
He's earned all the trust in that, Sandy.
Yeah,
everything's fine with Sandy.
So really, with every single pitcher, even with Johnny Cueto, where his raw stuff, he's at the bottom of the spectrum in terms of getting swings and misses is not even part of his successful equation at this stage of his career. But you want to see, how he is mixing his pitches, how he. Just every single pitcher, I find it fascinating to see what their stuff looks like at this stage, because that does normalize really quickly. That is something that you could get firm takeaways. I'll use one more example being Dylan Floro, who the past couple of years early in the season, he struggled to get up to his normal velocity. And so far, that seems to be the case again this year. I think today he had a couple of pitches. He's maxing out at about 92. And when he's when he's at his very best, he's maxing out usually 95. That's when he can hit, when he's truly up to full speed. But this was an improvement, I think, over his previous spring outing as well. And
It's a pretty clean inning, right? Which is a nice change
yeah,
for him too.
yeah,
This spring.
right. So you could just point to every single. It's really on the pitching side that I'm fascinated to see what those guys are throwing, because those are one of the few things that can have some significance even in the small sample, just because of how precisely we can cover that stuff thanks to Statcast.
Yeah, Rogers is definitely. If I had to pick a player who I'm most excited to see, I had him going in as one of the keys to the season. With a lot of the focus, and deservedly so, on the exciting arms like Luzardo and Cabrera. If Rogers can get back even close to that 2021 form, or even splitting the difference, just being a little above average, that's such a big piece of their rotation. And it's easily been the player I've been the happiest, to see. And I guess with Arias right behind him, just being able to get on base. But the starting pitching's been pretty good this spring. It's when we move to the bullpen there and get some of those other arms in there that seems to really boost up some of those pitching numbers.
Right. And a couple of the key relievers we haven't seen to this point because they're dealing with minor injuries: AJ Puck, Tanner Scott, and even further down in the depth charts, Tommy Nance and Huascar Brazovan. Thankfully, it seems like at least the one that I'm looking for clarity on is Tommy Nance, but I know that with Puck and with Tanner Scott, they're on track to pitch in their first exhibition games on Friday. I'll actually be at that game. It's not a TV game, so I'll actually be there in person to get a close look at them. So, especially Puck. Puck is an important one considering what they gave up to get him and the upside that he has potentially pitching in high leverage innings. So you would expect potentially the performance of the bullpen to get better in spring. Even if it doesn't, that's irrelevant as long as the stuff is there and the command of those pitches is there. So we'll get that's why just another reason why there's not really a huge reason to panic, just because a lot of the relief innings have gone to this point to players that were not really in the equation in the first place.
That's one thing that's what has me relieved the most, I guess. Horrible pun, not intended. There, and just in respect that so many of the high leverage arms haven't been in yet, but I was going to ask you if you felt confident that they were going to make it, but you seem to. We're not making that. We shouldn't be worried about their absence yet, and sounds like that they're going to be getting into games. Then hopefully we could kind of turn that pen around some. So one rumor, I guess one piece of Marlins news that came up today, probably just about after we thought this would have been behind us, was a report that the Marlins are still talking to Ely Gurriel. What are your thoughts on that happening? I kind of remember when this came up the first time, but after, I guess, seeing maybe some of the offensive performance to date, if it is a non-roster invite, thoughts on whether they should do that or not?
I think if it is a minor league deal, non-roster invite, it's hard to disagree with it as being a no-brainer to bring in somebody that was so good just the season before last and being such a great, not just an offensive player, but being a very competent defender at first base as well, and somebody that clearly has experience in the most important games possible, succeeding in those high leverage postseason games as well. And it's been pretty transparent throughout this offseason that he wants to play for the Marlins, all things being equal, because he makes his offseason home in Miami. He is aware of where he is in the twilight of his career. This will be his age 39 season. The fit makes a lot of sense. And if it's going to be even less money than we originally thought it was going to be, perfect, pretty perfect. Unfortunately, you need to put it in full context, is that this report comes out almost immediately after the first round of cuts from spring training camp. Included in those cuts was Troy Johnston, who is somewhat of a Fish Stripes favorite. We believe so much in his intangibles, in his hitting ability, in his plate discipline as well. But in a small sample of Grapefruit League games, it could not have gone any worse for him. Probably just as much defensively as offensively. He was a guy that was drafted as an outfielder and pretty early in his pro career converted to first base. And I've always seen him as somewhat of a liability at first. He's never fully gotten the handle of it. I think they were hoping that, or they were kind of counting on him to gradually get better at this first base position. And the early returns at the other side of this offseason are that no, that like a lot of the really routine plays aren't there. So then you begin to think, man, if he can't even spell Garrett Cooper defensively, potentially at some point this year, as a DH, like I think in a small sample, what we've seen in front of the screen and on TV, but also what's happening in the backfields, they're probably having the fact that he was cut so early in camp, despite already having AAA experience, despite hitting so well throughout his minor league career. I think you see a team that is a little bit less certain of him contributing this year than they were just entering camp. And that's why they point to somebody like Gurriel, that he's at the opposite end of his career. He's no bet to have anything left in the tank, but they recognize they're not just fully confident in their internal options at first base. So they have a whole bunch of other guys. We've already talked about Groshans trying that position. Kevin's listening, and he mentions Joe Rizzo, who played some first base in early games here. And his boy Gerard Encarnacion has gotten some first base reps before as well. They have so many of these players that can. They have so many of these players that can contribute at that position, but none of them are good. I mean, I can't be any more blunt about that. These are not good baseball players, at least not right now. And I'm not really super confident in them long term either, but not right now. Like this is, if Cooper goes down, I don't know if you're getting anything better than replacement level production from any of those players that I just named. Gurriel, his upside is clearly much higher than replacement level. So it circles back to the price and the fact that they could potentially get him in without guaranteeing anything. That's extremely tempting. So I understand that from the team's perspective.
And I think you especially have to like the potential, since they have one thing they've been crystal clear on all spring is that they're not going to be bouncing positions around with Jazz and with Arias there. That you might think that, well, they've got a guy who's pretty good at first base and a pretty good hitter who can pop in if they need to spell Cooper, but it doesn't sound like Arias is going to be a first base regular there in any capacity.
Well, I'm glad you
want him
that.
to stay at second and Jazz to stay at center.
They've hammered it so much into our heads immediately that he is second base only. I didn't even bring him up, but I mean that was his primary spot last year. He is. If I was running the team, I would certainly be open to using him at first base quite a bit this season. Even if you want second base to be his main home, he has that versatility. And when you play him at first base, that he is. I mean, he is their best first baseman. Honestly, Luis Arias is their best first baseman, even more so than Cooper is. So they don't really need to rely on these depth pieces as long as Arias is healthy all year. But they've made this decision, it seems, to let Arias focus on second base. From what he is saying, he really appreciates that he can focus on that position. So that seems to be somewhat of a handshake agreement that they are going to allow him to focus on that position unless something extreme happens. But because of that choice that they're making, they need to come up with a contingency plan at first base behind the unfortunately injury-prone Cooper that they feel really good about. And unfortunately, their internal options right now, I can't point to any one player and say you feel good about them. So they're looking at this point, probably the very best first base free agent available at this stage in the offseason.
Yeah, so be definitely be interesting if they roll the dice on that. And I hope to see them do it. All right, well, last question before we play Jeff or Not Jeff, Marlins Twitter's favorite up and coming trivia game. Just much more generally with spring training, and since you're about to head down, I am as well. What's one or two of your favorite things about spring training in general, apart from the regular season?
Well, I don't think this is a very useful bit of information for the audience. But I just love hanging around with Marlins personnel, like as a credentialed media member, kind of picking their brains about what's going on and how they feel about particular things going on with the organization or just the sport in general. And the fact that at this stage, before the minor league season gets going, before there's a whole lot of distractions going on, these people are in a mood to talk about things. They have time for you, and they obviously have an extremely different perspective than I have. During the season, it's hard to get as much of their perspective as you'd want, and this is the opportune time to get a head start on particular things, particular players, whatever is on their mind. That's very useful for our coverage moving forward. So I have to point to that being something that I really enjoy as well. The ballpark experience at Roger Dean specifically, we've talked about this as a staff at Fish Stripes, is how even though they certainly the resources that game day staff has to put on an event is just a tiny fraction as what they have at Lone Depot Park. But you almost, in a lot of ways, I kind of prefer that atmosphere for a game than I do at Lone Depot Park, where they seem to sometimes try too hard at the major league game to make it a huge event. Whereas at Roger Dean, they let the baseball speak for itself, you could say. So that atmosphere to take those games in while seeing a lot of the same players that you see in the meaningful games as well. I think it's great entertainment, or it's just, even if it's not like big entertainment, it's a great atmosphere. And so even just as a fan of baseball, it's a really great environment to take that game in. Less is more sometimes when you're putting on an event like this, and they seem to have a great finger. They've been doing it for many years at the same place. They have mastered the mechanics of putting on that type of event for that fits the mood, where it's very relaxed, but it's still extremely enjoyable.
Took the words out of my mouth. It's just that if you're at a spring training game, and I think I said this a couple of weeks ago too, it's just it's about baseball. You just really get the sense that you're everyone there is fully invested. Obviously the players are, but fans too. If you go out to a spring training game, that's you're there because you're passionate about the game to soak it in, and it's like a minor league game. The focus is just so much more on the game and on the players than, as you said, all the other trimmings that that once you're in the majors seems to be the focus a lot of the time at the big league park. But all right, so looking forward to soaking that in, and without further ado, time to play Jeff or Not Jeff. So, but if you've caught this before, we're gonna put a very elaborate spinning graphic here on the board, and you're gonna get to pick a year. The board will pick for you. If I can find it. Here we go.
The anticipation is killing me.
Too many tabs open there. Okay. So let's see what you're going to land on. We'll go over the rules.
Career. No.
Right. We did 97 last week. I think we'll respin.
Yeah, fair enough. Because I do remember a lot of those. That would not be fair. I think I would.
Yeah, if you land on 97 or 04, we'll respin. Got to shuffle in a couple. Wow, we did that one too. Okay, that's just a remarkable numerical achievement. Okay, 95. 1995, which means that this will be an edition of Jeff or Chef. And so stop sharing. So, okay, so you'll be comparing stats from that year if the leader was Jeff Conine or Gary Sheffield. Mm-hmm. If the answer is Jeff Conine, then you'll get to see the favorite. If it was Gary, if the answer is Conine rather, and if it's Sheffield, you'll get to see the play of the 97 World Series.
All right.
With the catch, anyway, the 97 World Series. All right. So, in 1995, the Marlins leader in home runs, was it Jeff Conine or Gary Sheffield?
Conine, he had a very good year that year, but in the power department, I'll go Sheffield. Chef.
Sorry, the answer is Jeff. Jeff had 25 home runs that year, and Sheffield had 16.
That Jeff number sounded right, but I just, wow. I did not remember Sheffield.
I couldn't believe it either. Looked it up. All right, next up for batting average. Who had the higher batting average in 1995? Gary Sheffield or Jeff Conine?
Jeff Conine.
And the answer is
what?
Gary Sheffield. 324 to 302. But you can still rally. You can still you can do 3 in a row, I believe. Okay. Who had the most triples in 1995?
Jeez. Chef. He was still young, still running around pretty well. What?
Jeff Conine somehow, inexplicably, had 2 triples to Sheffield 0. Tried to, with these, the categories picked for this, tried to find ones where they were close. They're in the. Now, next up, RBI. Gary Sheffield or Jeff Conine?
Jeff Conine.
Correct. Jeff Conine had 105 that season, and Gary Sheffield had 46.
Yeah. That was a layup.
Okay, well, a little trickery here. Last question, intentional base on balls. Gary Sheffield or Jeff Conine?
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, the batting order would have quite a bit to do with that, perhaps. Man, I would say Jeff Conine.
The answer is Gary Sheffield. Edged him out 8-5. But
how many games did Sheffield play that year?
I think so. So part of this is the strike. So no one played all the games they should have. But let me look that up. He was hurt for part of the year. He missed a big chunk of the season. It's my memory. I forget the injury, but he did not play all the games.
Right. So how do you have more? Jeez. Yeah. Well, I'm looking at it now.
Screwy stat line. 63. He played 63 games.
And yet he still led the team in intentional walks, even though he played less than half of the total games.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And then games played for contrast. Conine played 133 that year. And so about 2-1. So yeah, screwy stat lines from both of them for sure. Okay, well, last but not least, but thank you for playing Jeff or not Jeff. I need outro music for this. I'll get that for next time. But we'll wind down with the Marlins Top 30 countdown, and this week's members. So to date, who we've unveiled on this is Livan Hernandez at number 30, Pudge Rodriguez at number 29. And what we're working with this for, again, it's a formula of their Marlins war on there. Did they have any special awards or achievements with the club? Certainly some bonus points for a championship, which is what got the last 2 entrants on. A little bit of a different resume for what got them here in this case. And this week's name is Ricky Nolasco. Have him at number 28 on there. So the Marlins leader in most major pitching categories, 81 wins, well over 1,000 innings, 1,225 innings pitched, 1,001 strikeouts, 8 seasons, which really sets him apart. But not the strongest, pitcher. If you name the top 5 most talented pitchers, Nolasco's not going to be on there. But bit of a compiler. But what do you think of his placement on this list? Would you consider him one of the top 30 Marlins, and why or why not?
I think this is a good spot for him, where he should be on the list, but not particularly high for an organization that has a great legacy of top end starting pitchers. Like he is not even a name that comes to mind yet, just because of his longevity, his durability during those years as well. That he was overall certainly a net positive for those rosters that he was on. He had some individual games that stood out. I think he still has the single game strikeout record for the organization, where he struck
I
out
believe so.
16 early. Well, I don't yeah, I don't actually remember exactly what year that was. I know it was against the Braves, that particular game. He was a fascinating one because he also had this really big split between his run prevention and his fielder independent pitching. Um, it always seems like he was close to turning a corner and that he would have some sort of breakout year. And the closest thing, I guess, early on in 2008, he was pretty great in that department. And then beyond that, he never really got back to that level, and he certainly never improved upon it that much. Really, yeah, a really bizarre career that he had, where he was especially now, if he was pitching now, he'd be even more valuable for somebody that you can rely on to eat innings at a time right now where that is exceedingly rare to see that. It was not quite as rare in the late 2000s, early 2010s. This feels about right for Nolasco. Came up at he was part of some pretty good teams that were close to breaking through and actually being like relevant around there. So there was, even though again he wasn't even the face of any of those particular teams. He was never an all-star in his career as well.
No.
This feels right. Yeah, I feel like he should be on the list, but at the same time, I can't imagine him being much higher than the very tail end of it. I think you found a good spot for him in this regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of it's the compiling that really sets them apart, right? I was looking through some of the more qualitative, stats, and he's not even top 8 in pitcher WAR for the Marlins. He didn't make the board in win probability added. On their adjusted ERA, he just entered the top 10. As you said, it's seasons where innings were his main contribution. I think he had let's go over the stats. 2 seasons where he had an ERA under 4 with the club, but he was just always there, reliably present. And there, you're soaking up innings after Josh Johnson, briefly alongside Jose Fernandez. Some of those top arms, in between. Here's viewer. Just the eminent innings eater. And happy we had him. Had a lot of fun watching him. I had a real string in a row, right? I always try to catch the Marlins on the road, checking off stadiums. I'd always land on an Nolasco day. I'm confident that if I were to add up, he'd be far and away the pitcher I've seen pitch the most for the Marlins. And it's just always tended to be just kind of how it worked out. Buying the tickets, in advance. Then, JJ's going the day before. Got it. Jose's going the next. Okay. But saw plenty of Nolasco, and I think this is about right for him on the list.
Well, when I was looking through his stats, and what really you mentioned it, his win probability added, that jumps out to me. He was in the negative for his Marlins career to pitch that many innings and to stick in the rotation, yet in the situations that are like most pivotal to the game situation, the fact that he again and again and again like struggled in those situations in order to bring down his overall numbers. I think that speaks to the discrepancy between his counting stats and in terms of how he's actually perceived by Marlins fans, where he even as somebody that was around and pitched a lot, like at the end of the day, how many extra games did he really win? There's an argument to be made that he didn't really make the team dramatically better than they would have been otherwise. That being said, I don't want to disparage him too much because I do value the workload that he put in. So I don't want to tear him down. That's a number that I had not had committed to memory. I didn't realize that situationally he had for a lot of his Marlins career, he just didn't get the job done.
I didn't appreciate it was that bad either. I mean, my research showed I knew where I was in the top 10 list for those counting stats, and then I just kind of just to look at some of those qualitative numbers, I expanded the the baseball reference page from top 10 to top 50. I'm like, well, he's got to be here somewhere. And then I read it again because it's been a long day. And then I read it again, and no, not in the top 50. And when probability added, and as you said, it's a negative number, but still, what, 28th best Marlin in Marlins history, according to our show. All right, well, that's our time for today. Yeah, I'm Sean Miller. You can find me at Call of the Pen, and of course I'm here on Marlins After Dark. Eli, anything immediately coming up you want to promote for?
As usual, on Wednesdays, we have Fish Stripes Live, and we're going to have our first press box report of the season, where we're going to check in from the Marlins versus Israel exhibition game during that show. That'll be a nice wrinkle to put into it. And we have some pretty ambitious plans in later towards the end of spring training. I don't want to get into those until they're finally ironed up, but there's something new every single day on our site, fishstripes.com. If you just want to follow us on social media as well, you can find us wherever you look for Fish Stripes. It's this is such a fun time of year. There's always something new, and we're always really determined to make sure we're hearing what the fans want and try to give it to them and interact with them as best we can. So thanks again for inviting me on the show.
Of course, thanks for coming on. Be sure to check out Fish Stripes, and we'll catch you next time on Marlins After Dark. Go Fish.